Hello, my name is Jane Bempong. This video is about the Deaf President Now, DPN, movement of 1988, which occurred at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., the world's only liberal arts college for deaf people. DPN had an impact on both deaf and hearing people. Many people, students, faculty, staff, hearing allies, and politicians joined the movement. All over the world, people heard about the movement in different ways. Some others read about DPN in the newspapers and watched on television at the state, national, and international levels. It became known as the Deaf Civil Rights Movement for the first time in the history of America. So why are we making this video 30 years later? It's entitled Undocumented Voices of Deaf Women Leaders, a Historical Analysis. Very little has been documented about deaf women who were involved in DPN. Who are these women? Where are they? Why have they been neglected in deaf American history, women's rights, and disability rights movements for so long? This groundbreaking video takes a critical look, interviewing deaf women leaders about their experiences in DPN, as well as their perspectives about gender, gendered roles, sexism, and feminism in our society. The women also described how they overcame their unique challenges and talk about how their role models influenced them.
I did go to Kendall's school. I went to school at Gallaudet from preschool until second grade. And then, let's say I was there first and second grade. Then I transferred to public school. So I was on Gallaudet campus a lot because my parents taught there. And then after I transferred to public school, I did come often to watch plays, dance performances, basketball games. My father was a phys ed teacher, plus he was very involved in sports, and my mother taught English. Later on, my brother enrolled at Gallaudet, and I was friends with many of his friends. I myself didn't enroll or graduate from Gallaudet. Growing up, Gallaudet was my home. After finishing school at Kendall, I often went to a place on campus called the Snack Bar. It was in the old gym. I was there while waiting for my parents to finish teaching or finish with meetings. Then we would go home together. For many students, I became the student pet. They would chat with me because I was around campus a lot. And after I transferred to public school, I still came to campus regularly. And there were people at Gallaudet I knew the same time I was at Georgetown University. I worked on campus. I was an employee working in Bill Stokoe's lab from 1974 to 78. And during those 4 years, I did have friends my age there. Growing up, I saw many of my parents' friends there. I felt like Gallaudet was the center of our community. There were many dynamics between the different groups. My parents' friends, groups who worked at Gallaudet, groups who didn't work there. I was aware of the different social networks. In Gallaudet, it was the center of our universe. I graduated from public school having had no interpreting services at all. At that time, the concept of having an interpreter in school was unheard of. Because I was hard of hearing, I could hear well enough for school, and they didn't think I needed the support of an interpreter. When I started high school, I saw there were more and more group discussions and projects with discussions, and I knew having an interpreter in college was a must. Now, Georgetown University, I was interested in linguistics, so I was advised that Georgetown was the top university in the field, and at that time, linguistics was just beginning to spread to other universities following Chomsky. I attended and enjoyed my 4 years at Georgetown. It was nice to split my time between there and Gallaudet. I graduated from Georgetown in December of '77, but I marched in 1978. So from January until I moved here, during that window of time, I worked at NAD. And I had the opportunity to be involved with a deaf association. I worked with T.J. O'Rourke. A faculty member had read about Gallaudet and said, "You should be there protesting with everyone. Why are you here?" I think he was teasing a bit. I found it interesting that this hearing person who knew nothing about deaf culture read about what was happening at Gallaudet and felt I should be there. I let him know that my parents were keeping me informed, my brother and my friends were all keeping me up to date. It was an interesting time. But, I really couldn't drop what I was doing and go. So I watched from a distance. There was a lot of internal happenings I couldn't really see, but I did hear from people like Jane or my parents and friends. And, at that time, there was no social media. Gosh, I have to think back as to how people communicated. Most information was shared through the TTY or in person or through TV. We would discuss it and try to put it all together. If it were to happen now, every detail would be shared. But at that time, we really had to rely on how people reported that story. I wasn't directly involved, just an observer. I didn't think of her as a woman. I thought of her primarily as hearing. I have to admit, I didn't think of applauding her as a woman. I just saw her as hearing first, and I was shocked, even though the message was clear. And hearing people, they just didn't get it. So I was both shocked, yet not surprised at what happened, and dismayed. But the fact that she was a woman was something I never thought about. It's interesting. I'm trying to think back. Were there deaf people on the board at that time? Braven, Sanderson. Was there a third? Who was the other deaf person at that time? There was no deaf woman, no. I would say that we, looking back, the deaf perspective of Spillman, let me get the name. Spillman, is that right? And Zinzer. Both looked like many of the women that I knew here at UC San Diego, who were in administrative positions when I was faculty at that time. Very similar. Women who get to that level are not politically aware. Most are either very careful or very tough-minded. Really, worse than men. Hard, rigid. Nowadays, women in administration are very different than they were at that time. So Spillman and Zinsser represented that kind of woman who rose in the ranks to get to the level with very little heart or compassion. Little sensitivity or connection or empathy. You couldn't survive with those characteristics. Now we're starting to see women who are able to be women in higher positions. They're still tough-minded, but in a different way. The kind of tough-mindedness that made them feel that they were responsible for keeping order and not losing control. They felt it was their responsibility. It's not one person's responsibility. All of the people created that. All the people on the board created that situation, yet those women took on that responsibility during DPN. I don't feel like I could identify with either of those two women. They're not models that I would emulate. I've seen so many examples that I've blocked out. So many instances. I couldn't function that way. I just couldn't. Something happened recently. It was an interesting case. It involved working with a group of faculty in my division, along with faculty from another division. The dean was shocked that I was deaf, or that I was a woman, or both. I'm not sure at times which it is. Both aspects of me go together. It's hard to separate them. There was some awkwardness in working with a deaf person and where to sit, in the positioning of an interpreter, with my ability to lip read, and where my eye gaze is directed. People often react that way. UC San Diego is a big campus. We have 36,000 students, 2,000 faculty. My division alone has 230 faculty, and that's permanent faculty, not including lecturers. Not counting visiting professors. With tenured and tenured track only, counting them, we have 230 in my division. We have 10 departments. We have approximately 90,000 enrollments every year and 1,200 classes every year. We are the biggest division on campus, so we merged with another division. We were thinking that faculty from both divisions would collaborate to offer opportunities to work with industry as partners. They have money that they could give to our divisions, where our faculty would do projects working for industry in partnership. In the past, I received grants from NIH and NSF, but this was my first time with industry, so we turned with them. We thought it would be nice to merge. But as we moved ahead, problems arose. The dean from the division began to feel patronizing, condescending. It felt wrong to me. My faculty saw how he spoke to me, and then someone brought up to my previous dean, Jeff, how I was being treated. He then told me that I should file a complaint, and I responded that I saw it all the time, and so I couldn't file a complaint every time a situation like this occurred. If I did, I would never be able to leave my office. That really hit him. I assured him that I could take care of it and I could approach the other dean myself, and I told him not to. Now, apparently, something was going around in the other division. This division is a very male-dominated one, and the word got out to our chancellor, who's a very unusual, interesting person. He's very in tune, aware of issues related to equality and sexism. Apparently, he learned of the situation, not from me, from many others, and quickly confronted the other dean, even though he's a very successful dean. The chancellor told him several things regarding his behavior, and the dean was shocked by that action. Now I see his behavior has changed. It's a little bit different because of the confrontation. That's very different coming from the top. He took on the responsibility rather than leaving it to me. It seems that the entire institute is addressing issues that way, which is important to me. It shouldn't be the responsibility of the affected person, a deaf person to be the lone educator of hearing people. I won't do it. Or a woman having to always call people out on sexism. I don't want that kind of institution. I don't expect people to do things only because they have to, because someone filed a formal complaint. The chancellor was very frustrated with my previous dean. He's very sensitive if women are not treated right, and he addresses it. I see discussions happening on campus, which is healthy. People sometimes hold back a bit, but it's healthy. DPN made it possible for deaf people to become department chairs. I became a chair following DPN. And even this job, well, a lot of people, sometimes I think that what's happening in the deaf world follows along from what has happened with African Americans or women. And sometimes it seems it happens with deaf people first and then the other groups. And many times when I see protests, I ask myself if it has already happened on a bigger scale, like when DPN occurred. Sometimes, I don't know. I wish I could figure it out. I'm not a historian like you are. With DPN, is it akin to, do we need more Black coaches? Do we need more Black managers or corporations, GMs, CEOs? More Black individuals on TV networks, shows? Not as friends, but as a leading role. To me, a lot of that happened after DPN. The protest for Howard's president occurred after DPN, not before, so that's interesting. Did DPN influence what came after, or was it already in the air? I think both. The second protest at Gallaudet was an interesting one. It was more complicated. But that, I think, was followed by Me Too and Black Lives Matter. I don't know. Is that just a coincidence? Or perhaps, somehow, with deaf people stirring the waters, willing to show that a smaller group can act more than a bigger public stirring in society, it touches a pulse. And it causes an impact that then grows into a Me Too movement or a Black Lives Matter. I think things have moved to a new heightened level on this campus. I feel it too, dealing with both the Me Too and Black Lives Matter. I think it has impacted me in the sense of worth, feeling a sense of place in the world, a place in history. Definitely, DPN has had a huge impact for all of us, my parents, my brother, everybody. How we talk about ourselves, how we address what we see happening that is not right, what we're owed, a sense of being entitled to a just life, to justice. It has made a definite impact. It's been transformative. I think it's all related. I think it's interesting talking about women in higher education and DPN. It's all related. DPN brought about a new type of deaf leadership, not the school leadership, not deaf association leadership, but deaf university leaders. That opened up more possibilities for deaf people to enroll in universities and more deaf people to take on administrative positions. I remember there was a panel, The Importance of DPN After 10 Years. It was still too new, not a long enough history. Now, after 30 years, it's starting to become reflective, to see what has really happened since then. The ADA, many people feel DPN made it possible for the ADA to succeed. ADA led to captioning, which has become widespread, chips required in TVs, more interpreting services, more push for accessibility in technology, T2Is being replaced by video phones. So it's very interesting. What a time in deaf history. I feel very fortunate to have lived during this time, during the period, the beginnings of sign language research, which was before DPN. During that time, there was also a shift to mainstreaming. In my time, it wasn't called mainstreaming. Public school wasn't called mainstreaming. It was stated as, well, hard of hearing students go to public school, and that was it. There was not a special category or name given. If you could hear and speak well enough, you went to public school to give it a try, and a few people here and there were able to do it. It wasn't a movement for inclusion, not until much later on. So there, at the very beginning, I was born at the right time, and I was able to watch this sweep of history until today. It's an amazing time to be alive.
We wish we could interview more deaf women for this video. This is only the beginning. The purpose of this video is to strengthen identities and serve as a source of pride for deaf women through their stories. For the first time, they are telling their stories as deaf women about women who are deaf. We hope that you will disseminate, discuss, and share these goals by exploring the intersections of gender, sexism, culture, and women's rights. Thank you for watching.